Okay, now listen. There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about for a while. But, it's not the easiest thing in the world to talk about, especially nowadays. But it's super interesting, and it's a Jewish perspective on Christianity that I bet you've never even heard of or thought existed. Maybe you don't know how a Jewish person thinks about Christians or what they're being taught about Christians. And so this is really interesting. Now, the Jew teaching this class is, they use the Zohar. They are Kabbalistic, Orthodox Jewish people. And the thing that I love about these types, this theological type of Jewish person, is that they're very metaphysical. They're not just all about the material. They very much understand there's a metaphysical thing going on here. And lately, they've been talking a whole lot about the coming of the Messiah. Now, it's a big problem because it sets them up to believe in the Antichrist, right? We believe in the Messiah's return. They're waiting for the first one to come, okay? So what it is for them and what it is for us is very different. The thing to do would be to convert them before this all goes down, and it seems like it's going down pretty fast, if you know what I mean, the end of the world, or the second coming of Christ, which to me is the beginning of the world. But anyway, okay, so here's the first little tidbit that really rocked my socks when I listened to this. And someone who is like a fan person of Kabbalistic Jews, I'll call the person the monkey. The monkey turned me on to this, and it's super interesting. Did you know? Did you know that you're an Edomite? If you're a Western Caucasian, basically, I think if you're Western and Caucasian, you're an Edomite. So you are not Jacob, you are Esau. So I'm Esau, and the whole Roman Empire is seen as an Edomic Empire, I guess you would call it, Constantine and whatnot. But guys like me are Esau, we're like aggressive and a little rough. And Jacob, you remember, he liked to be in the kitchen. He was kind of a chef. He liked to stick around his mother's apron. And, well, it just said he liked to be in the tents, which means, I think when you're talking about the tents in Scripture, you're talking about all the domestic things that have to go on during the day while the men are out scouting or hunting or fishing or doing whatever they're doing. They're not doing it in the tents. They're doing it out away from the tents. So when it says that Jacob was fond of the tents, I think that means that he was, more into the domestic side of things. But anyway, so Edomites, listen up. This is really kind of interesting. And I'll tell you, I've had a primer on this, and there are a couple things in here. Missing Jesus kind of throws the whole thing off. And you know what? Let me say this first. And I should go right now and read Romans 9. Let me grab it real quick. But I think this almost needs to be done. This needs to be done like almost every time a Christian is going to speak about Jewish people, at least for me, in my conscience sake here. So, listen. Oh, this is fantastic. Okay. All right, so let me read this. And now, Paul here is talking about how we Christians should think of Jews who didn't convert to Christianity. And now remember, this is Paul. This is a man who's seen the risen Lord. He's living in the first century, okay? And there are Jews who've converted to Christianity, and there are Jews who haven't. And there are pagans who've converted to Christianity who may look down their noses at the Jews who have not converted to Christianity. But listen to this. This sets our hearts in the right direction. This sets our spirits in the proper orientation. Okay? And I think it's important to read this whenever we're talking about the Jewish people and their faith, okay? Because I'm telling you, I'm telling you now, Christian, you're the older brother in the parable. You're the older brother now. You have to kind of keep that mindset, right? Don't you dare get high-handed or big-headed about things. And this is Paul's admonition to us too, right? So listen to this. This is from the New King James. And I said I use that because it's easier to memorize. It's not everyday language, right? So that's why I use it. All right, so listen. New King James. Let's see, where is this from? New King James, Romans 11:17 through 21. Okay? And if some of the branches were broken off, he's talking about Israel, okay, of this olive tree. If some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but that the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Well said, because of unbelief they were broken off, and you stand by faith. Do not be haughty, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare you either. Amen. Okay? So let's remember that. Let's keep that in mind. Let's keep that in mind, when we are speaking of our Jewish younger brothers and sisters, okay? There's nothing more that I want than to see them grafted in again. How rich and joyous a day it would be, right? It would be fantastic to realize that our Redeemer's feet have touched down upon the earth and made the whole place holy. The whole place is the Holy Land now because of what the Lord has done. So anyway, let's get down to it and see what happens here. I'm not so sure. We're going to find out, though, right? We're going to find out. So let me get to my screen here. This is all going to be edited out, of course. Of course. Yeah. All right. So let's see where this leads, huh, folks? Play.
So last time we saw how Esav became Rome. How did that connection get made? Esav's Esav in the Torah. What does that have to do with Rome, Italy, hundreds of miles away? When was that connection made? So we saw a few links. One was in the descendants of Esav in Bereshit chapter 36. The last descendants there are called Magdiel and Irom. And the Midrash says that those were the founders of Rome. Irom sounds like Ir Romi, the city of Rome. So that's...
Okay, so you see where it's going or where we're coming from here? And doesn't it make it's like a common sense kind of thing, okay? Because if we all descended from Adam and Eve, right? There's only so many people and so many people groups. So yeah, where did Esau's people go? They didn't just die off, right? What was their history and their future? And it seems like the Jews have kind of kept track of people, because here in the West, we rely on the Bible stories. And the Bible stories cut off at a certain point. You don't follow through history the story of Esau and his people after the Bible story ends. So, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. I mean, I take it with, what do you call it? Take it with a little trepidation, right? I don't buy it hook, line, and sinker, but the premise, the idea that the people didn't just disappear, but they became people. Okay, the Edomites became a people, and here he's just saying that they became the Roman Empire. That the Roman Empire are Edomites and the descendant of Esau. And it makes kind of sense, right? Because he was a mighty warrior. He was a conqueror of lands. Remember how scared Jacob was when Esau was coming? Okay? All right. So, here we go. Let's do some more. I really like this stuff. I know. I'm just playing around. But hey, don't you find it interesting? Isn't it interesting to know you're a freaking Edomite?
That's one connection, and then we also looked at the story of Herod.
Got to get out of the way of this
Herod
guy.
was an
I'm new at
Idumean
this.
and an Edomite, and he also became the client
Herod
king of Rome,
Wow.
king of Judea, but he was a Roman. He was a Edomite, Roman, was appointed the new king of Judea by the Romans, and he was always seen as an illegitimate king because he was not a genuine Judean. He did not come from the tribes of Israel. The Torah says that a king of Israel has to be a native-born Israelite Judean, and he was not. And he slaughtered all the rabbis who would have protested against his rule. So he becomes this like huge villain, Herod, but then he also rebuilt the temple.
The innocents,
And at that time, Idumea ceased to be a distinct entity. In the year 6 of the Common Era, the Romans completely dissolved this province of Idumea and attached it to Judea. And Herod, this Idumean, was the king of Judea, and he was Roman. And I think that's when the connection between Edom and Rome was solidified.
Oh, big
Through
news
Herod.
right there.
It was
Hey, stop the presses. Do you hear what he said right there? He said that was the marriage between the kingdom of the Edomites and the Roman Empire. Herod, in the year 6 of the Common Era, according to this rabbi, is the connection between the Edomite Empire and the Roman Empire. This is where the handoff happened.
Symbol of both Edom and Rome at the same time. And of course, what happened with the Roman Empire, after the temple was destroyed in rabbinic texts, it's always called Edom, but the Roman Empire slowly transformed and became the Christian Empire. So at first, Edom.
Okay, so yeah, it's a little hard to swallow, don't you think? Right? The Christian Empire is an Edomite Empire. Now, that the first reaction is pretty strong in me, right? It's pretty strong in me. But Christ, to get upset about it, you're not outside the kingdom when you get called an Edomite, and that's the internal, natural, fleshly reaction to say, I'm not outside the kingdom. No, you're not, because Christ's sacrifice is way bigger than the darkness of being an Edomite. Oh my gosh, it's so fun. This is so much fun. The internal struggles. Oh my gosh, I'm an Edomite.
Meant the Roman Empire, but over the next few centuries, Edom also became a synonym for the whole Christian world, because the Roman Empire was a Christian empire, became a Christian empire.
Okay, I gotta say something here. Yeah, for you, the connection was, this isn't like objective. For you, the connection was these are Edomites, and now it's the Roman Empire, and now it becomes, Constantine makes Christianity the national religion, and so now that solidifies the marriage. No, these people were just going along with their lives. They don't, they're pagans or whatever, converts to Christianity. They don't know they're not like, was there, and there's no like Edomic, I don't know how you say it, form of worship. They're just pagans. All right, let's go.
And do you remember who was the person that made it a Christian empire? Who was that key figure? That's right, Constantine. Right, so Constantine, who reigned as the emperor in the beginning of the 4th century, he was officially like the first Christian emperor of Rome. And how he became the Christian emperor of Rome is very interesting. Maybe his motivations were a little bit suspicious. Why did he suddenly become a Christian? The previous Roman emperors were, for the most part, anti, and Constantine changed that. Why? So he was...
Well, this is interesting here. Pay attention right here, because you might have just heard the show there with Joe Rogan and a guy named Wes Huff, a Christian apologist, and he says something very interesting. That Diocletian, the emperor right before Constantine, was the greatest persecutor of Christians. He wanted to wipe them out, right? So that's pretty crazy. Edomites eating their own. And I guess the thing to criticize and what the rabbi's saying, because you don't really have to criticize all of it. Yeah, we're Gentiles. Edomites were part of the Gentile community. And you're either a Jew or a Gentile. There's no, I mean, maybe there's a better or worse because of some history between the two groups, between the Jews and whatever people group, like the Babylonians, like, so you're a Babylonian. In their eyes, you might be a worse person than a Spaniard, right? Because, there's the Inquisition. Or an Argentinian, or, oh my gosh. Or Tibetan, or whatever. But I don't even know where I was going now. But listen, it doesn't matter. You're either a Jew or a Gentile. So, but the thing you need to take away from this is that it's not an objective perspective, it's his perspective. This whole connection between Christianity and the Edomite Empire. And you have to remember, too, he's talking about Christianity like it's just the Christianity of the West. There's a Christianity in the East going on, too, where there's no Pope in Rome. There's just a bunch of bishops, right? And the bishop at Rome is just one of them, okay? So there's the whole Eastern Church, which housed most of the apostolic fathers, right? Athanasius, Ignatius, all this stuff, all these fathers were in the East, right? So there's not like a homogenous Christianity. He's talking about Christianity like it's a one lump thing, and it's not. So remember, take what he's saying with a grain of salt, Edomite.
In the middle of a civil war, a power struggle for the throne, and at this famous battle in 312, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge,
sounds fun.
He claimed that he saw a dream and that Jesus came to him in a dream and told him to put the letters Chi and Rho to stand for Christ. Right? Christ just in Greek means Mashiach, the anointed one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Christos is the same thing in Greek. So the letters Chi Rho to put on Constantine on his shields, on the shields of his army, and that would help them win the battle. And he did win the battle and entered Rome triumphantly.
This is what gets me. Talk about the dream the guy had. And laugh it off. Yeah, he had a dream about Jesus. And then the dream comes true, and there's no this is part of what Jesus means when he says, don't cast your pearls before swine. I've noticed this if you go to talk to somebody about the seemingly, and it is miraculous because God arranges events that aren't miraculous, and it makes something miraculous out of it. Does that make sense to you? God can arrange a series of non-miraculous events that in the arranging of the events themselves is the miracle. That's how I found God working in my life most of the time. It's a series of non-miraculous events that, when taken together, are one hell of a miracle, right? So anyway, they'll read about the dream, and then the dream comes true, and it's like, oh, no big deal. Casting pearls before swine. Let's get back to it. Be right back. We're back.
After that, and became the sole emperor. And so some say that he decided to become a Christian conveniently the night before this battle to gain the support of...
Conveniently, and then he won the battle.
A large number of Christians that would have been there.
When did Christianity start?
When did it start? Yeah. Presumably with Jesus. So let's see. Right, that's what we want to talk about. I think that's what we want to focus in the first half of the...
Sorry, I didn't hear that question at all.
This class. How did this religion actually form and become?
Okay. I think what he said is, well, how did this religion start? And the guy said, well, obviously Jesus.
Become associated with Edom.
I would say obviously Abraham.
Because in part one, we looked at the early history of Edom, the actual biblical Edomites. And then in part two, we're transitioned to the Roman Empire. And now we want to see how did Edom come to mean Christianity?
To you.
That's the next thing. And how did it become this distinct religion? So it was
It's not an Edomite religion.
Constantine that became this first apparently Christian Roman emperor, and he issued the famous Edict of Milan, which ended Roman persecution of Christians and gave freedom of religion to everybody and legalized Christianity. And again, all the previous Roman leaders and emperors...
You know what I just realized? And this is really This is a tough hurdle. I don't even know if this is a hurdle someone like me could overcome just because of my presence. You know, if they see me as Esau, I mean, there's just no way I can not be seen that way just because of my mannerisms, my personality. You know, the description of Esau is a description of me. So I'd have to stop being myself, or they'd just have to forgive me for being Esau. I think that's it. They'd have to figure out how to forgive me for being Esau. Because, man alive, yeah.
For the most part.
And I want them to. I want to be friends.
We're anti-Christian, we're very, very pagan, and we're supporting paganism. And Constantine wasn't really so different. It was Constantine that in the year 321 decided to make Sunday the Sabbath for Christians.
Okay, this is going to be fun. First of all, did you guys catch that? Constantine didn't decide to make Sunday the Sabbath. And I'm going to go into an explanation of this for if a Jewish friend ever watches this. This is how we Christians understand why things changed, okay? And the way we see it is that the cross of Christ, the sacrifice of the Lamb for the Passover, which is how we see the crucifixion. It's the Passover, right? That's the Passover, the blood of the Lamb. And so the angel of death passes over us because of Christ's blood. He's our Passover sacrifice. Okay? And now that's tied into the creation narrative. Because it says, right, that God completed all his work in 6 days, right? And on the seventh day he rested. Okay, well, Jesus died before sundown at the start of the Sabbath. And the way that we Christians read that is that God had completed all his work, Jesus Christ on the cross on the 6th day, and on the 7th day he rested. And for us, that means that God rested. Jesus was dead in the tomb, resting on the Sabbath. So when he rose from the dead on that Sunday, we see that as Christ rising from the dead in the new heavens and the new earth, in the kingdom of heaven, in this glorious and eternal 8th day that has no end. So it's kind of cool. I mean, if you look at, is that the infinity symbol? But think about the 8th day as being the eternal rest and the coming of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven. And it's eternal, so there's no more need for days. It's just one glorious big day, okay? So that's why we Christians see Sunday as the Sabbath. It's because God rested from all his work on the 6th day and rested on the 7th. Christ rested from his work on that Friday, dying on the cross, and was in the tomb resting on the Sabbath. And on the 8th day, that eternal day, he rose from the dead. And so that's why we celebrate Sunday as the Sabbath. It has nothing to do with Constantine and everything to do with Christ. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Christians. Sunday was the Sabbath for the whole Roman Empire. Why Sunday? Shabbat. Sabbath is always Shabbat, always has been. Since creation, there's no doubt when Shabbat is. Shabbat is...
Yeah, that's when Jesus was resting in the tomb.
Saturday, always has been. And Constantine in 321 decided to make it Sunday.
Wrong.
And why did he make it Sunday?
Wrong.
Because Sunday was the day that the Romans worshipped the sun.
It could be maddening, right? But, you know, it's just like, he's going to... People, it's not like he's like me. He's like me. He's in his bubble. He's getting his information from somewhere. And even before he gets this information, he's had a whole lot of other information grinding upon his mind. Okay, so it's easy to get frustrated and feel insulted. I'm sure they feel really insulted all the time about us getting their perspective wrong. But listen, you know, I think of it like this, and maybe I'm being way too gracious. But it seems to me that the information that comes into it is, so imagine we're like a big piece of glass, right? And information hits the outside of the glass, and it shapes the glass in a certain way. It creates a prescription for the way we see the world. all the information that comes in. Imagine it like debris and abrasive stuff, and it's hitting the outside of this big lens that you're behind, and it's shaping the way you see the rest of the world for the rest of your life. So for information to more information to come in there, you have to you're almost going to have to figure out how to reshape things in a certain way so that he can even see the stuff that you're sending at him, right? You're trying to reshape the way he sees the world. And when we're talking about theology and religion, you're talking about reshaping everything. The meaning of life. The meaning of life. That's what's at stake here. The meaning of life. That's what's at stake. So let's go on. I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to say it wrong anymore. I got to find some Trump or something.
Their sun god, Sol Invictus, one of their supreme gods. And you still see Roman coins that Constantine minted that actually depict Sol Invictus, the sun god, with Constantine. So Constantine did not abandon his beliefs not entirely anyways, didn't entirely abandon his beliefs in Roman paganism, shifted the Sabbath, the Christian Sabbath, the Roman Sabbath, to Sunday, which was perfectly fitting with the former.
Okay, so if I'm going to be gracious about it, I think he might be making a distinction between the legal shifting and the actual thing, because right from the start in the book of Acts, Christians are meeting on a Sunday, right? And as Jesus said, let me just throw this in there too. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God's on our side. God's on our side, brother. All right, let's go back.
Or pagan Sol Invictus day of worship. It's the sun. It was S-U-N day. He changed it from the sun to S-O-N to supposedly the Son of God, Jesus.
Again, isn't that fantastic? I don't see why that's so unusual. How would it look? Okay, maybe this is what bothers me. Maybe this is what I've been trying to get at and I couldn't figure out what it was, because it wasn't really the misgetting of the information or getting it wrong. It almost sounds like he's discounting Constantine's experience and saying that it was calculated. It almost sounds like he's saying it was a calculated experience that Constantine was on, and not the things that Constantine were doing were not organically prompted by the interaction or his perceived interaction of the Lord in his life. I guess that's what's bothering me. Because to be honest with you, I think Constantine had an experience. I think he had an experience and it shaped him, and he just happened to be obviously a 5'10", 180-pound Jewish rabbi, fairly unpopular in the Holy Land, was crucified next to the garbage dump outside the walls of Jerusalem, shamed by his own people and shamed in the sight of the world. Yet here we are, 3 centuries later, and he's conquering it. He's conquering the West. Why is it so hard to believe that he would conquer the West by entering the dream of the emperor? And don't we have stories in the Old Testament about dreams? And how God used dreams to move kings? Isn't that the way it works? Anyway, back to the story.
Right, but there's a different sun originally. It was the S-U-N sun, Sol Invictus. There were those, he wasn't the first to suggest this.
I will give him this. Even as wrong as he is, or if he's wrong, he seems to be honest about what he's saying. He doesn't seem to be pulling any punches or trying to slip you a Mickey here. I'll give him that much.
Were Christian scholars, theologians before that, as early as the 2nd century, that suggested that Christians should abandon the Jewish Sabbath and switch to Sunday, but it was never actually done until the time of Constantine, which is really ironic because Jesus himself and his disciples, who were all Judeans in Judea, would have thought it was completely sacrilegious and blasphemous to keep Shabbat on a Sunday. To them, it would have been absolutely crazy and heretical. So it's a little bit ironic.
Yeah. See, here's what I mean about perspectives. There's 2 ways to look at that. they would have seen it as heretical, right? Had their world and theology not been turned upside down by the rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth. That's one reason they could switch, that they wouldn't see it as blasphemous. If the Lord of the Sabbath himself said, the Lord of the Sabbath himself says, and it's recorded in Scripture, he does say this to them, the Sabbath was created for man and not man for the Sabbath. If the Lord of the Sabbath says that to you, I think that kind of opens the door. If you want to worship on a Sunday to acknowledge and recognize the resurrection of the dead and the new kingdom to come, if you want to do that, I think the Lord of the Sabbath says, hey, go for it. So that's one way to look at it. You don't have to look at it the way he's looking at it. Yeah, that would be true if their world hadn't been turned upside down, right? And maybe their theology was fulfilled. So there's a different perspective there to look at.
Ironic, they would have laughed at that, of keeping a Shabbat on a Sunday.
They would have, like I said.
Because it makes no sense, because Shabbat's supposed to be on to commemorate creation, and the Torah is very clear on when Shabbat is. The very beginning of the Chumash, the beginning of Bereshit, is all about Shabbat. Now, in the year 324, Constantine had at that time another co-emperor who was a pagan, who didn't like Christianizing the Roman Empire. And again, there was another war, power struggle for the throne. And Christians at the time, in 324, they fully supported Constantine because his opponent, Licinius, was much worse, and he wanted to turn the whole Roman Empire back to the pagan ways of the past and to, again, expunge Christianity. So for the Christian leaders at the time, they saw this as like the apocalypse. This is the battle of light versus darkness, and they fully went all out in supporting Constantine, and Constantine won, and that's when really the Roman Empire becomes a Christian empire, and Constantine doubles down on making the Roman Empire Christian. It was in the year 324.
I'll take a little break after this segment here. I mean, this is fantastic stuff. It's so energizing and captivating, as wrong as he is, But he says a lot of stuff that I think it goes right by him. Like the whole idea that, the dream would change Constantine, missing that. I mean, I would think that a man well read in the Old Testament scriptures would be like, he had a dream. The king had a dream, and it changed the course of history. I mean, it sounds so Old Testament, Sounds so Old Testament. But, yeah. Oh, and this is what I wanted to say. Christian empire, it's just, I don't know if that's the right way to say it. It's not. Constantine made it the official religion or legalized it. It was really largely a protection. You know what I mean? So it's not like, it's very strange the way he's talking about it. It's very strange. I can't quite get my head around it. I think he's conflating things, but my Western mind is struggling right now because I want to go to like a separation of powers, like a separation of church and state, but I don't think that was going on. The whole idea of the secular is a very, very new, last few centuries kind of thing. How you lived was what you believed, right? It was your religion. So, anyway, what I want to get to, I think he's going to get to, is the Council of Nicaea, and that's fantastic. So I'm going to take a little break right now. I think I might put this up as part one. We'll see. But let me pause this.
Year that he decides to build a new capital.
All right, let's go.
Not Rome, which was already in disarray and falling apart and would soon be overrun by barbarians, but a new Rome, a second Rome. And what was the second Rome? Byzantium, right? What would become Constantinople and what is today Istanbul. So Constantinople is named after Constantine because he actually wanted to make this. He started building it as his new capital, as the eastern capital of the empire, and it would be like a new Christian capital. And the same year, 324, another major thing happened. Constantine wanted to formalize the religion. So he said, there's too many different ideas here, there's too many different beliefs in the Christian world. and he decided to gather all of the Christian
That's right, I gotta
scholars
go
in
here.
Nicaea. That was the Council of Nicaea.
All right. Let's pause this here. Now, history is not always, it is linear in the large and general sense that we're moving from the beginning to the end. Okay, it's linear in that sense, but it's also stratified. And because it's as complex as there are as many humans involved. So when he says that Constantine, here, hold on, I gotta fix something here. I'm having a little technical issue. So here, hold on. All right, we're back. I don't know. Okay, here we go. And what I was saying was, and what he was listen, history is stratified, okay? The Arian controversy had been happening for a while. This guy named Arius, this priest named Arius, was going around claiming that Jesus wasn't God. And if you know the gospel is that God became a man. Man shared his body with God so that God would share his body with man. Athanasius, you could say he was second in command under Alexander, who was the bishop at the time of Alexandria. Athanasius said that God became man, that man might become God. So you see, the whole nature of the gospel was at stake. It wasn't that Constantine wanted to solidify Christianity. It was that the bishops were dealing with a battle that was threatening to undermine the gospel. This was not an organizational political movement to form the church, okay? This was a legitimate defense of the gospel by great men of the faith. So that's where he's wrong about that. Now, that isn't to say that it might not have been in the minds of generals, commanders, politicians at the time, right? But it wasn't in the mind of the church. The church was focused on protecting the gospel and defending the faith. That's what was happening here. Make no mistake about it. All right, here we go.
Christians actually believe. What should they believe? And that's when they, at the Council of Nicaea in 324, they were debating.
It was basically, what is the gospel? And what is the gospel that Christians should believe?
All of these core questions. What are Christians supposed to believe? Who is Jesus? Is Jesus the Son of God? Is he God? Is he one and the same as God? Or are there two distinct figures? Trinity, right? Is it monotheistic? How monotheistic exactly is Christianity? What does that mean? Do they believe in one God or one God in three parts? And Constantine gave the opening speech at the Council of Nicaea. And ultimately they came up with the Nicene Creed, which concluded that Jesus was entirely God, which, again...
Now, don't make the mistake of thinking that Constantine had some kind of theological input here, okay? He's the power, all right? But the real theological meat came from some monks, some philosopher monks from Cappadocia, Cappadocian monks, okay? The real theological meat came from these guys because they took a theological concept of essence, of homoousios, of the same substance with the Father. So homoousios was their contribution to say that Jesus is God, three persons in one God, of one substance, okay? So that's what came out. And don't get the idea, he's kind of giving the impression here, if you didn't know any better, you would think that Constantine was having some kind of theological input here, but he wasn't. But listen to what he's going to say here about who Christ is and Christianity. And I think there's another, you can look at it from the other side. So listen to him.
Who is Jesus? Is Jesus the Son of God? Is he God? Is he one and the same as God? Or are there two distinct figures? Trinity, right? Is it monotheistic? How monotheistic exactly is Christianity? What does that mean? Do they believe in one God or one God in three parts? And Constantine gave the opening speech at the Council of Nicaea. And ultimately they came up with the Nicene Creed, which concluded that Jesus was entirely God, which, again,
Now, to be fair, the theologian mind in me, and he says entirely God. That's sloppy, because there's no theologian, there's no Orthodox Christian theologian that would argue that Jesus is not human and divine. It just becomes a matter of, amongst theologians, how much or little you're going to separate and distinguish those persons. Me personally, I don't understand deconstructing Christ. I understand for defense. I can understand that. But to get lost in the details like that, you're going to miss the person. Like Jesus says, you'll strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. He's the God-man. He's the Son of Man. He's a person, and he's alive. I don't know I've never understood. It must be a personality thing. The desire to take something apart, to take Christ apart. It doesn't, maybe someone could explain it to me. Like I said, I understand it. I understand it when you're trying to defend something. But if you're not defending anything, studying it and getting all wrapped up in it just seems like a distraction to me. And I would be actually, I'd be very suspicious of a person. I'd be like, dude, do you know the Lord? I'm psycho like that when it comes to, I'm always trying to analyze why someone's doing something. Where's your mind? Don't you ask yourself that when you watch people do theology or basically anything? Say, I wonder why they're doing it like that. I wonder why they approach from the left and not the right. What is it in their past? Is there some trauma, right side trauma? Anyway, let's get back to it. I'm getting distracted here.
Anybody in the first century, to any of the original disciples of Jesus, that would have been complete heresy to suggest that a human was divine or equal to a god.
Yeah, but here's that's great. That's great. If some guy came around claiming to be God and then didn't rise from the dead, okay, that'd be great. Okay, but these aren't just any first century Jews. These are first century Jews who saw a guy who claimed to be God get crucified, claimed to be the Messiah of Israel, claimed to be the God of Israel. They saw him get crucified, then ate fish with him, and then he taught him for like 40 days, and then he ascended into heaven. So any notions of heresy were probably quickly diminished and almost reduced to rubble by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Wouldn't you think? And secondly, no, I don't think it would have been heresy during the Second Temple times. Scholars, at least Christian scholars and Jewish scholars, actually, if I could remember his name, I think his last name is Schwartz. He wrote a book about the two powers in Judaism and about how there were two powers in heaven. Basically, the angel of the Lord and the Father, the angel of the Lord and Yahweh, okay? And I think he accentuates the passage. It may be the burning bush, and it may also be the passages where Abraham's encountering the angel of the Lord. But the burning bush one is really good too, because God refers him to himself in, like, he's talking to himself. He's having a conversation. So this whole notion, this whole idea that the Christian idea of the Trinity, one God in three persons, is completely foreign to Jewish theology. It's not. It's actually more ancient. Second Temple Judaism. If you're going off rabbinic tradition, if he's going off rabbinic tradition, that's going to be greatly different from Second Temple Judaism, right? We run into this and in the Christian side of things in the Roman Catholic Church, because they rely heavily on tradition. And that, trust me, it's a rabbit trail. And there can be as many as there are men. And thankfully, there aren't many men that get to decide. Otherwise, we'd have that many more supposed God-given traditions or hoops you have to jump through. Anyway, don't get me started. Let's go on. This is really interesting, right? I bet you didn't know you're an Edomite.
Would have been absolutely blasphemous and crazy. And again, you see this motivated by pagan Roman beliefs where humans can be God, and gods were very human-like. Zeus, Jupiter, whatever it is, Hercules, Mars, they were described.
And this is people who don't believe do this a lot too. When they look at gods and stories like creation stories or stories of gods and pagan religions, when they see similarities in those, instead of seeing those things as the copycat of the real, they see Christianity as the copycat of the real. Whereas a Christian will look at that and say, oh, obviously, this is like the stones crying out. Like Jesus said, he said, if the people weren't cheering for me, the stones would. Well, I think this is kind of like the same thing. This is like people are yearning. People are yearning, right? And so when they're not getting it, so the gospel is trying to get out through general revelation and through these notions of other men, or, and also maybe it's the devil masquerading and trying to create false religions to make Christianity look like the copycat. But you never hear him mention that. And I mean, you can't really expect much more than that. But it's immensely interesting. Here we go. Let's do some more Edomite stuff.
In very human terms, they could
And I'm not very hairy.
mate with humans. They could have half God, half man children, demigods. You think about the story of Jesus as supposedly God impregnated a human woman. How is that different than Zeus impregnating Europa, or any?
Well, the big difference is that the Zeus Europa thing is made up and this is true. That'd be the big difference.
Or the story of Hercules being a demigod, where his father is God and his mother is a human woman. It's basically,
and too, and my heart is in the right place in this. My heart is exactly in the, if anything, maybe I should be a little harsher, but I don't feel it. I really just don't feel it. And let's just keep going back here.
the same story. So you can see where these Greco-Roman pagan elements fuse with Christianity here, or fuse to make this new religion, which would have been totally blasphemous to any self-respecting Jew in the first century.
Who hadn't seen Christ resurrected.
And completely impossible. It's completely contrary to what the Torah stands for.
Actually, no, because I think I think Job, it's the oldest book in the Bible, he says, I know that one day my Redeemer will walk the earth. And everybody knows the Redeemer is God. Nobody but God can redeem somebody. So it is not foreign. It is foreign to Rabbinic Judaism, but I don't think it's foreign to what I'd call ancient Judaism or seminal Judaism. So, these are conversations. I don't have any. The thing that sucks is they're also segregated. I don't have any conservative Jewish friends. It would be great if it was like there was like this utopian coffee shop or soda stand or something where all the nerdy theologians from all the different faiths hung out and argued, That's a utopia. Wanted somebody to have a sword, So, this is as close as we're going to get unless somebody interacts. So let's go. Let's go back.
Were the early Christians Jewish?
The original...
Oh, that was a good question. I don't know if you heard that or not, but he said, hey, were the original Christians Jewish?
Believers in Jesus would have been just Jews in Judea, religious Jews who were expecting Mashiach to come and believed him to be Mashiach.
Okay. So, if they believe him to be the Messiah, how is it so far-fetched that all this other stuff would happen?
That's not new. That's happened throughout history. It happened before Jesus. It happened after Jesus.
No, it's completely unique to history that an itinerant rabbi who had 11 terrified followers conquered the Roman Empire within 200 years of his supposed death. So it hasn't happened in history before. How did this little rabbi who got crucified conquer the Roman Empire? And now, how is he sitting? Isn't he sitting at the right hand of God, overseeing the largest religion in the world? And the other thing that's amazing is I don't know a Christian around who doesn't want to protect his Jewish, what would you call them? Progenitors? I don't know a Christian around who wouldn't run to defend physically, with words or otherwise, a Jewish person. the Christian in light of what I read in the beginning of this in chapter 11 of Romans. In light of that, we should be as friendly to them as possible. As much as they'll let us. I mean, we shouldn't be the ones that stifle any kind of grace. We don't do that. We treat everybody equally, but they're special because we've been grafted into their history. We become the sons of Abraham through faith because they carried on the traditions. They gave us the history. They gave us the Christ. So let's go on. It calms me down. I feel better because I can get really worked up. I'm still very much a brother. I had a little brother and we fought, right? So the more comfortable I get with this guy, the more likely we are to fight. All right, let's go.
It's happening right now with certain Jewish groups. There have always been Jewish groups who believed a certain great, charismatic, wise leader was the Messiah and believed in that person so badly they were willing to go to the ends of the earth to spread that message.
Yeah. Why did that happen? Why? Why all of a sudden did they go from Jews in Israel to who are hiding in an upper room to guys who are willing to die for this? Why? He's so snarky about it, I think he's younger than me, so I could beat him down like an older brother.
So it's happened throughout history. Jesus was not the first, and he was not the last.
Oh, and don't make no mistake. You have an advantage when you have ears. It doesn't matter if the guy's bigger than you, brother. If he's bigger than you, smaller than you, I don't know. There's just some weird magic there.
Also, at the Council of Nicaea, interestingly enough, it was only then, in the year 324, that Christianity detached from the Jewish calendar. Until then, they always used the Jewish calendar.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was here that they decided not to use the Jewish calendar anymore, to make their own calculation for Easter. Until then, Easter was always Pesach. They always relied on whenever the Jews said...
Okay, now my initial thought on this, maybe I have too many thoughts about this, but my initial thought on this is it's pragmatic. It's just purely pragmatic. Yeah, the early converts to Christianity were Jews and lived in that region. Okay, but the Roman Empire was big, and they must have been thinking, we're going to have to figure out how to make this. When I was a boy, my mom used to give me like aspirin in a spoon, and she'd crush it up and put a little water in there, and then, sometimes she'd put sugar in there. Most of the time she wouldn't. So I think. It's a little syncretistic, but I think it's syncretistic. They're being syncretistic for the spreading of the gospel. That's what I think's going on here.
Pesach, that's when we celebrate
That's gracious reading, not my little brother's reading.
Easter. But it was here that they formally detached and stopped using the Jewish calendar. So this is where you could see the Council of Nicaea as the birth of Catholicism as its own religion, completely separated from Judaism, and where Roman Christianity...
It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. The Catholic Church is so much like Rabbinic Judaism. It's incredible with the traditions and all this stuff. And I don't know what he's talking about, how it's detached from Judaism. Hasn't he watched the Ten Commandments, the movie? I don't understand. That's a movie Christians celebrate and watch every year. How in the world do you say that it's detached? Plus, there isn't a Christian Bible around that doesn't have an Old Testament, right? And every Christian knows that in the old, the new concealed, in the new, the old revealed. So they work together. There isn't a Christian alive who doesn't embrace the teachings of the Old Testament. We all Christians who have an understanding of the Bible and right theology understand that they're sons of Abraham by faith and that they're members of Israel, that they're part of the sand of the sea that's promised to Abraham. Whatever. We're all sons of Abraham by faith. Okay? Let's go.
merged together. This is now the official religion of the Roman Empire. So that's, I think, henceforth, that's where Edom also means not just Rome, but the whole Catholic Church. And the Vatican, spoke about this before, the Vatican used to be before a Roman pagan holy site. That was the hill out beside Rome where all the pagan sacrifices used to be done. The Vatican was converted from a pagan hill of worship to a Christian hill, a Catholic hill of worship. So they just switched everything from pagan to Christian conveniently. And all the holidays too. Like Christmas was put on top of a former Roman holiday. And Easter was put on
right then, going back in.
Yeah, Christmas, December 25th, was based on a solar phenomenon, on the winter solstice. Right?
And this is going to sound weird, but the Magi story where they track the stars to find Christ? There's a guy named Michael Heiser, and he does a great little teaching on it, And you should watch that because he argues that the stars and the planets, because God, and this makes perfect sense, God is a God of order, not chaos, okay? So the stars aren't just floating up around there for no reason. They have a purpose and they have a season. And Heiser argues that they're kind of like a timepiece. And it's hard to argue against that if you argue against that, you have to say the Magi story is BS, right? Because they got the time. They knew what time it was by looking at the sky. They knew what time it was by looking at the sky, okay? That's pretty cool, huh? So when we talk about solstices and things like that, you also have to remember that that the syncretism it's a very pragmatic thing. Maybe not the best thing, but hey, it worked out, right? It worked out.
Usually around December 22nd is the shortest day of the year, and the sun is the lowest in the sky for a few days. And on the 25th, the sun starts to rise again. So the Romans this was a holiday of worshiping the sun. So conveniently, you just change S-U-N to S-O-N. And now instead of the rising sun, S-U-N, it's the rising sun, S-O-N. So you just...
Yeah, I like that. That was nice of him. I appreciate him throwing that softball. That was a good one. So I'm going to try to skip ahead. All right, this is super interesting, then I'll wrap it up. But listen to this. Listen to this.
Jesus is not obviously his name. He would not have been called Jesus in the first century. What was his actual...
Well, Yesu, okay. But, the New Testament was written in the first century, right? The New Testament was written in the first century. John would have been written, and Jesus is the Greek version of the name Yeshua. So he's wrong here.
Name.
Yeshua.
Right. His name would have been Yeshua, right? Yud, Shin, Vav, Ayin. Right, Yeshua. So where does this name come from?
So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. I mean, you can only take so much, I'm a Christian theologian. I've been walking with the Lord for a long time, for not long enough. But man alive, it's hard to take. But it's understandable, it's understandable. One thing I've learned is that it's really easy to think that you'd make a different decision than another person, if you were put in their position. But that's not how it works. You'd make the same decision because you wouldn't be in their position, they would. It's not how it works. You're just setting yourself up for judgment. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed learning that you're an Edomite. And it makes sense. I mean, it's hard to take. I don't know about you, but it doesn't, it's not the easiest thing to take. It's not the easiest thing to take. Like, being compared to like Cain but it's not easy. Peter got called Satan, it's terrible. When you see it, when you see the devil in yourself, oh my gosh, it's the worst. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, Edomites. And Trump is like the Edomite king. Maybe I'll suffer it again and go to a portion where they talk about Trump is like, and it's a favorable. They love Trump. They love Trump. The Kabbalistic, Zoharian Jews, the metaphysical Jews that I love so much, they're super cool. I mean, if you're gonna be a Jew, I think you ought to be a Kabbalistic Zoharian Jew. You know, and that's what I think you'd want to be. You want to be that metaphysical kind that's not so locked into the material, that understands that God is in, with, under, and around all things. Anyway, God bless you. Like and subscribe, Nuke Lutheran.